Thank you very much. I'm Karl Malakunas. I'm the director of the film, and I'm very lucky to be up here with Patrick Alley, the co-founder of Global Witness, who's joining us for the Q&A. I have to say I feel very honoured to be up here with Patrick. I spent a long time researching the film and always been guided by Global Witness's reports, Global Witness's investigations, and to be up here with the guy who started all this type of work decades ago on the Thai-Khmer border, having a look at logs coming over the border from Cambodia and seeing him start this foundation, starting his organisation and turning it into what it is. It's a real honour to be up here with you, Patrick.
I'm really just an idiot, so and my fellow co-founder of Global Witness is sitting back there if he waves his hand, and and the other one's back in the UK. But anyway, thank you for having me, and what a brilliant film.
Thanks very much. Okay, well, shall we sit down, I guess?
Happy standing up.
Happy standing up, yeah.
Down all day.
Okay, so if anyone would like to ask us any questions about the film, about the issues of land defenders.
Hi, thank you. Hello, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Maria Cristina Mundin. I'm from International Lawyers Project, and I'm actually a Filipino. So this really resonated with me, and so thank you for making the film.
Sorry, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Put it closer.
Sorry?
Go closer there. Oh, no, yes, with the microphone closer to you.
Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm Maria Cristina from International Lawyers Project, and I'm Filipino. So this really resonated with me, so thank you for the film. I wanted to ask, because we recently had an election this year, so how is it with the new, under the new president? I know it might be worse, but has there been any developments after the film was made?
So the elections had some mixed results, some positive ones. I think the most positive I'd love to talk about is Nieves Rosento. She said that she would fight back, that she would come back into politics. So she, I guess, laid low for 3 years, and in these elections she ran for the Palawan board, and she won a seat on the Palawan board. So she was, I guess, the only non-establishment pro-environment candidate to be on that board, and she is working to try and set up these Lenny and Jesse Robredo style people consultative councils there, where she's having a local grassroots organisations, civil society groups trying to hold their local governments accountable. As Bobby said at the end of the film, it needs the civil society to hold governments accountable, and that's what Nieves is trying to do. So she's still there fighting. In regards to the higher level, Jose Alvarez was term limited, so he had to stand down as governor. He's flipped over to represent Palawan, Southern Palawan, in the National Congress, and so he's still an influential figure there. His vice governor stepped over to become governor. On the national level, of course, with Ferdinand Marcos being elected president and Sara Duterte vice president, there is a lot of fear about what's going to happen in the human rights situation. From our perspective, in Palawan, it's local figures and local officials who continue to pose the most dangers to the people in Palawan, and that will go on regardless of who is president. It happened during the Aquino years, it happened during the Duterte years, and it'll continue to happen. As I said, Jose Alvarez is still a very influential figure. We're hoping that there is some space with the Marcos administration to try and do something positive with this film. We're building a campaign, an impact campaign to help defend land defenders, to support them and the natural resources that they protect. As part of that, we're hoping that there might be some space with the new Marcos administration to work to try and save these last 600,000 hectares of forest in Palawan. And there are various organisations and groups that we're working with. The head of forestry at the Department of Environment and Natural Resources has seen the film at a screening in the Philippines, and we've had some initial conversations with DNR. So we're trying to work constructively with the new administration, while at the same time understanding that the threats are just as great as ever for the people of Palawan.
Thank you.
Hi. Just on this issue of what can be done with the new administration, I had a bit of a surprise earlier this year. Just to put it in context, I'm a civil society board member of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative of the International Board. And I also sit as part of that on the so-called validation committee. We go through the validations of countries that are members. There's some 57 countries, one of which is the Philippines. We have a part of the EITI standard known as Part 1.3, which is the Civil Society Protocol, essentially allows for the suspension of countries where there are breaches of that protocol. That is supposed to look after the interests of citizens and civil society, basically, to play the role they were supposed to play within the EITI, specifically holding the governments and companies to account. So it doesn't so much relate to logging or forestry, but it does relate to other collisions like mining and so on. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we spent 6 months fighting with the other constituencies at the international board, the governments and companies, trying to get Philippines suspended because of serious breaches of 1.3, because of red tagging and various other specific case studies. And I just wanted to offer this as a reflection. One of the frustrating things I found was the extent to which other countries, including countries like Canada and others, fought tooth and nail to prevent a suspension of the Philippines. And the logical arguments put forward by them were not logical. They seemed to think they were, but they were really, it was extraordinary. Anyway, I can tell you more about that if you're interested. But just to offer something of hope, my fellow civil society board member, someone called Cielo, for some bizarre reason, if you knew who Cielo was, I can't understand why the Marcos regime would go for this, has put her into, or asked, and she said yes. She's now in government, overseeing the EITI. And if anyone can sort this out, Cielo can sort it out. Her attitude, by the way, is if they won't let me do what I need to do, I'll just quit and I'll go back to my tenured university position. So if you're interested in having a chat with Cielo, I can connect you.
That would be absolutely amazing. Thanks very much. Yes, thank you.
Hi. Thank you for this complicated film and good luck with all the campaign. Can you tell us a little bit what periods did you shot the film and how long did you take to edit and post-produce? Because there's a lot of producers, so maybe it took a lot of time to bring them all together, I can imagine.
Yeah, so we essentially filmed over about 3 years, finishing just before the end of the pandemic. So the end of 2019 was the end of our filming. So we were there for 3 years, on and off. Going back, I was living in the Philippines for the start of that filming. I lived in the Philippines for 8 years, and then I moved to Hong Kong and then came back regularly over that time. And then it was 2 years in the edit. Much longer than I think even our experienced editors had expected. COVID played a big part in that. I was stuck in Hong Kong. We had one editor in California, one in Australia, trying to do remote editing, and people say that you can do remote editing and, and that all works. I'd recommend against it. It's quite painful.
Thank you.
Oh, just a very quick question. I was toggling between here and the closing ceremony, so I was unable to watch all of the film. Where, if anyone else is in the same position, where could we see this film in its entirety at a later date?
We currently are still selling our rights overseas. Where we should be announcing something for Europe very shortly. We've currently got our American rights with PBS. It's screened in America on POV in September, and then it has been available online on PBS's streaming platform. But I believe that bit has expired, and so we're currently going through the festivals and going through to festivals and our broadcasters outside. But if anyone from this event is interested in seeing an entirety, they can come and contact me, and I can share a private link. So I can share a link with you later.
Hi, I'm Janine Garcia, and I am also Filipino. And I actually heard about this film because I used to be in this NGO that Bobby Chan was working in before he moved on to PNNI.
ELAC.
Yes, exactly.
So many ELAC people here.
Yeah, there's the three of us here. So thank you very much for creating this film, and also to the founders of Global Witness for supporting this kind of work. My question is, just watching the film and it's very depressing. Also to know that it's obviously still going on. I mean, there's so many things that are depressing in the Philippines, yes. But I'm just wondering, how did it feel for you to be doing this film, and to be witnessing all of this, including the murder of somebody that you actually were working with, and what kept you going?
I always hope this question doesn't get asked because I get quite emotional on the murder of Cap. But what kept us going? I mean, honestly, when you see Bobby and Tata and Nieves and Mimi and their courage and their strength, and I hope people come out of this film feeling inspired by their strength and courage, and that's what drove me all the time. Because once you get in there and start filming all that, you can't just walk away. But I'll try and get through this bit. But the hardest bit was Cap Rubin and his daughter and his daughters, and that was watching that drove me. It's watching that after that funeral, I just that really shook me. And of course, being with Cap in the forest where he says, "I'm trying to do this so that when I grow up, all the big trees, won't be gone for my daughter," and then his daughter's standing over his coffin. So I guess at that point there was never any going back to try and tell his story.
Thank you.
I'll just add something to that. The reason Global Witness started working on the issue of land and environmental defenders 10 years ago was because a colleague of ours was killed. Someone we'd worked with in Cambodia over some years, and he was gunned down by the Cambodian military police because he was a forest activist. And it was the first person we had known personally, and I understand your emotion, who had been murdered for doing what they do. And that's why we started documenting the killings of land and environmental defenders. We just thought, what can we do? And how we all know it happens, of course, but how much did it happen? And where did it happen? What were the reasons? What were the drivers? And we thought the best memorial that we could do was to produce these reports. And this report, which is available in this room, we produced this year because it's the decade since we started documenting this. And since Chutbuti, the guy I'm talking about, was killed, 1,733 land and environmental defenders have been murdered. Countless more, and that's a very minimum figure. It's an underreported figure. We have, can you just hold that a sec? Yeah, it's just, these are not just statistics. We have everybody's name. Every number we have a name. And so we've been documenting that, and it's become a global reference point for the issue. It's quoted often, and that, I think, is one of the best things, not the only thing for sure. We want to try and stop the drivers of this, but to raise awareness of what goes on in this brilliant film, and thank you for making it. Just shows, it's brilliant. It brings it to life. This is just a report. Just to see the courage of these people. And
in this brilliant report, it shows that 270 people in the Philippines have been documented to have been murdered over the past decade. So if you do the numbers, one every 2 weeks at least, 40% of those have been Indigenous, and most of them have been murdered over the issues of mining and forest deforestation. The Philippines is one of the deadliest countries in the world, alongside Brazil, Colombia, Honduras, and all the stories of Cap and the battles of Bobby are being fought all around the world in their own form, in the same way.
I have a question for Patrick. How do you feel personally about how and where this film could be most usefully screened, to whom and to what effect?
Sorry, I didn't hear properly.
The film.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in your view of where it could be most usefully screened. Who should be seeing this film, and what would you like to see sort of coming out of a campaign around this film?
I think everybody should see it, but well, actually, I think there would be some clever answers to that, but I think to get it seen as widely as possible by the public would be brilliant, because lots of people just don't know about this stuff. And even if they know about it, it might just be a sort of dry old document like this, and not the reality of getting to know people, know their families. That's a brilliant thing. But also, to take it to places like the European Parliament, and centres of government in different places, sort of do film screens there, so that again, MPs and stuff, whatever, national parliaments all over the place, to get them to see it. Because one of the reasons that this campaign has worked is, at Global Witness we produce stuff on different campaigns, and sometimes the press just go wild for it, and sometimes they don't. And they did go wild for this issue of defenders with very little work on our part. And I think it's because a lot of the stuff we work on is quite arcane, or it sounds arcane, corruption, what's that, but these are human stories. You can identify with these people, their mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters. And it's a window into the problems you're talking about. It's a window into what happens to communities when corrupt politicians get going, or agribusiness, logging, mining. So I just think to get the politicians to see that would be really, really good.
Can I just expand on that? Just taking me back to the example I was given before. I think one of the shocking things that I found out of the Philippines discussion, and actually even an earlier one that was on Azerbaijan, where it took 4 years to get Azerbaijan suspended from the EITI, even though we had handwritten notes from our fellow Publish What You Pay campaigners who were smuggling them out of prisons, describing how they were being tortured. I mean, that is the extent of how bad it has to get before there's any action. Anyway, the point I was going to make was to reinforce Patrick's point about politicians, and to link it back to our global systems. I think a lot of our governance systems worldwide are too technocratic has the government done this, yes or no, tick, has it done that? And there's a very technocratic language which is associated with that. So when you get to an institution like EITI and there's debates about all this kind of stuff, it's, well, is there freedom for civil society to act, yes or no? Oh, well, there's a thriving civil society in the Philippines, therefore there must be. And when you say, yeah, but all these people got murdered, then, oh, those are just environmental defenders. So I've even found myself trying to defend our use of the term environmental defenders to explain you can't stick them in a box over there, that has nothing to do with this. So I'm cynical enough to think that most of this is deliberate, because then we'd rather like using the word collateral damage, so you don't have to talk about people being obliterated, right? But I think it really helps to force those with power to actually think about what they're doing, and those with power who could do something about it, who can too easily go, oh yeah, there's freedom of association over here, so I don't have to bother. So I'd really emphasize that. If you could take this into high levels of power and the corporate world as well, and make them look at what they're doing, would be very powerful, I would suggest. Thank you.
That's great feedback, thank you. And one other statistic on that, we talk about 270 land defenders being killed in the Philippines over the past 10 years. There's also been 197 journalists murdered since the restoration of democracy in 1986. There have been 3 murdered since the new Marcos administration came in. So, yeah, it's not just land defenders, it's journalists, it's anyone who wants to stand up to powerful interests.
Joya Seron from the Philippines. When the killing started in the Philippines, drug killing started in the Philippines, I also thought Filipinos would not allow such rampant killing to continue. I really, really thought there would be another people power or another revolution. And then now we have a government president that won 31 million of votes. This is despite of efforts like this, showing the stories of those who got killed and the families of those who got killed. There are so many efforts like this as well, and really, that would really break your heart. The killings of the drug war, every day on papers, you can see the stories, the crying of mothers, crying of children, every day in the past, during the Duterte period. And I also was thinking this is not going to be acceptable to Filipinos. We will, at some point, going to have another people power and kick out Duterte. But you see, he ended his term, still perhaps one of the more popular presidents of the country, and still with solid political capital. I think in terms of communication, the proposition that stories could move people and could bring them to our cause, maybe we need to rethink that. Maybe there's really another way of getting to people and bringing them back to our causes. I'm not only referring to human rights, I'm referring to a lot of reforms and even anti-corruption. So I think there's need to rethink how do we get to the people, because ultimately we need to. Or else 31 million will be voting for politicians who will continue the murdering and who will continue the corruption. So I guess that's the challenge. I don't think the direction is moving up to international. I think it has to go down. We need to communicate down, and we need to understand how do we bring back. This is the country that invented people power. I have high hopes for the Filipinos, despite of my frustration that we didn't kick out Duterte and we've elected another Marcos. But the challenge really for all of us is to think how. How do we communicate and how do we bring them back to this kind of causes that ultimately, how do we bring them back to believing that this system that we have, ruled by dynasties who are killing left and right with impunity and who are plundering the country, is not acceptable, and we can do something about it. I think at this point, the Filipinos need to dream again, and we have not really offered anything yet. And I think that's the challenge. And of course, I appreciate, I really, really commend the effort. This is, I will continue to find ways to bring this to also my constituencies and my communities. And of course, I would like to cooperate. I'm very happy that EITI actually starting to go beyond the technocratic aspect, and I would like to know the story behind the other countries who are refusing to penalize the Philippines. But yeah, I hope to continue the collaboration, and yeah.
Thank you, Joy. There, yeah. One comment on what we're trying to do in that respect, and how do people see the film. My dream is to get it shown in every barangay, in every basketball court in the Philippines, and universities. So part of our impact campaign at the moment is getting community screenings throughout the Philippines. We've started that. We've probably been in about a dozen schools and universities around the Philippines so far. Part of our impact campaign is for people to try and sponsor screenings across the Philippines, and we're also working at the moment with Climate Reality Philippines to get it out there. But what I want to do is get it out to, as you said, on the ground throughout the Philippines, and say they can see Bobby and Tata and Nieves and see these heroes in action and be inspired by them.
And what was the response to the screenings?
Oh, it's been wonderful. It's been incredible. Look, the one response in the Philippines, and you can see this online, where we showed it at Cinemalaya at the CCP at Imelda Marcos's place. Ironically, 1,500 people sell out, and it was like a carnival in there. The energy in the room was just cracking, and people were cheering and booing and laughing throughout the film. And then when they didn't realise that Nieves and Bobby and Tata and all the parent forces were in the crowd, and when they got up on stage, everyone was crying. There was this huge moment. It was beautiful. But then with these grassroots screenings, we've had a couple of young university students write some very powerful essays. They were COP27 delegates, and they took this message to COP with us. We've had one article recently in the Manila Bulletin comparing our heroes of Delikado to Jose Rizal, and yeah, so we've had those types of responses. But the university students are coming out and just saying, yeah, look, they feel inspired to action. We had one small screening in Aklan with a community who was fighting to stop their area mangroves from being destroyed for developers, and it was just a screening for 100 people there. And apparently they came out and they said, we're not alone. We're not fighting this battle by ourselves. And I think that, having this sense of community that around the Philippines, that this is hopefully going to start building, I think that's going to be important.
And just one cheery note, when we produce these reports with the figures on the Philippines, Duterte in particular gets really, really pissed off. He responds.
Hi. I just had another quick thought, which is that I don't know how to do it, but it would be useful to get the tourists that go to Philippines to see it.
Yeah. Again, you've touched on another part of our impact campaign that we're trying to do is build awareness around this, and Palawan is obviously one of the top tourist destinations. And again, we're working to that. We don't have any easy answers or a clear pathway forward yet, but we're trying to work out how to get tourists to ask the right questions of where they go. I think that's hard because we don't really have the answers of where they should go yet. I mean, you know, as Mimi, the Indigenous leader, says, you know, these lands have been owned by Indigenous people first, and they've been either have been taken or will be taken. So it's really a hard answer to talk about sustainable tourism or the right type of tourism in Palawan, but that's.
There are already right now tourists that are going to the Philippines, and if there is some way, I mean, probably most of them or many of them have no clue.
Yes.
So if there's some way you can, you know, I can see the algorithm like that we get for our targeted publicity when you buy an airplane ticket, you know, that could just suggest that this film is available for them to see.
Right.
I mean, that's a little bit dreaming, but somehow getting to them.
Great. Yes. Thank you.
Actually, it's a great idea, and I'm wondering, you know, how the environment is actually very cross-sectoral, in the sense like the Department of Tourism would be a good ally, I think, to watch this film. And because, yeah, El Nido, and then so they can also advocate for this kind of tourism, right?
Yes.
I forgot to mention one specific action point, which is also in reflecting on the discussions earlier on cross-sector. Defenders is it's a very good category. And what I like about the film is it doesn't talk about victims only. It talks about people who really, you know, who are fighting back. And I guess the challenge now and the immediate action step would be not only to get this to the universities and the communities, but also to look at other defenders in other sectors. Because what I'm seeing in the Philippines right now is really the need to consolidate the different, you know, the different activists and the different defenders of rights. They should really have, you know, solidarity and alliance. And that's what is missing actually now that we need to regain in the Philippines. And even the ones that are not necessarily what you call very in adversarial or in more of in a violent situation, but more of like health defenders or education defenders. These are people who are holding government to account. This is in my group more of the constructive accountability, but would definitely see the intersectionality of all these issues and how we need to bond together to actually, you know, be defenders of rights and you know, democracy in the country. So I would like to explore that, and also would like to recommend it to the other groups of coming up with that kind of cross-sectoral and cross-sectoral defenders alliance building. Thank you.
I'd love to talk to you more about that, Joy, and work on that. Thank you.
And just to add to that, there's a really good group, and it's based out of the Philippines, called Indigenous Peoples' Rights International, run by a woman called Joan Carling, and it was started by Vicky Tolly-Corpus, who's a heroine to us all. Yeah, so IPRI, you know, what's really good about them is you kind of make it global, because sadly, you know, what that community is going through, they share that problem with many people across the world, and IPRI is not the only group, but you know, groups like that are really useful to tap into, I think, and because we need to, you know, it's a big place, but it needs to be a global community here on this issue as well.
So if we're through with the specific parts of the film and how to best leverage it, might I ask you how you personally got involved in this interest and how you decided to go for it?
Yeah, sure. I'm I'm a journalist. I work as a journalist. I'm still a journalist. So I was based in the Philippines for about 8 years. So way back in 2011, I was going to go down and do a story on ecotourism in Palawan, and it was just an excuse really to go down and have a look at this beautiful place. And an environmental campaigner who I was in touch with who was going to take me to his ecotourism projects was shot in the head and killed a few days before I was about to go down. So I went down to investigate his murder instead, and when I was down there, I met a lot of other land offenders down there, and they were telling me, that it's basically, it's carnage down there, it's mass murder, and people just didn't know about it. A lot of these, or some of these environmental campaigners were asking me to meet in secret locations and speak off the record about, because of this culture of fear. And then there was Bobby Chan, who I met at the same time, and there's Bobby with this tree made of chainsaws on the main road of Puerto Princesa, and he was saying, told me about this program that he was running with these guys in flip-flops and unarmed running into the forest and taking chainsaws from illegal loggers. And he wanted to make a statement to the community that we shouldn't be afraid, that we have to stand up. And he wanted to tell the authorities that he wasn't afraid. And so I realised then that there was something pretty special about Bobby, and there was something, I could tell a wider story. And more broadly, being in journalism for so long, in daily news journalism, I'd always wanted to try and do something a bit longer, maybe something that would have a bit more of an impact. And my reporting's always been, my heart's always been environmental and rights reporting, and so all that converged into this. And just follow. I just had no idea it was going to be a 90-minute documentary. It was just going to go and start following these people a bit more, and went into the forest a few times with them, and then Cap was killed, and then at his funeral we met Nieves, giving her powerful speech, and then helping to bury Cap, and then telling me that she believed she was on Duterte's drug list. And putting all that together, I realised it was a pretty good story that could really, go into something a lot longer and a lot deeper, and that's how it built.
What did you find were the advantages and disadvantages of being a stranger and obviously being of a different color, doing this film and following it so closely?
Well, I think one of the big advantages was I was able to go down and tell this story. There have been journalists who have famously had to leave Palawan because of death threats. One of the most famous and best journalists in the Philippines, Marites Vitug, wrote about Governor Alvarez decades ago and was hit with a pretty strong libel suit. So the various forms of intimidation that the Filipino journalists have faced are a lot more real, a lot more visceral. Even when I was living there, was able to do this a lot more safely than I think Philippine journalists could. Here I am, in Washington, be able to tell this story. People in the Philippines don't have that luxury to leave. So I think I've come at it from quite a privileged position to be able to tell that. So I think that was one of the advantages. When we sent, and I felt very lucky to have earned the trust of Bobby and Tata and Nieves, and not really sure whether how that works in terms of me being a foreigner, but I know with Bobby, there was one time I went down there and very early on, and I were talking to him. We didn't really know each other that well, and he said, "Look, if you really want to be serious about this, you got to go in the forest and with my boys." Yeah, sure, no worries. And when? He said, now. And so get in the van, and we got in the van and you know, found myself sleeping on the side of a road and then in the forests and filming it, and then filming a couple of confiscations and coming out. And from that moment on, Bobby and I had a pretty strong bond. He said, you know, a lot of journalists have come down here before, no one's ever gone into the forest, and no one's ever filmed he was thrilled to have this piece of evidence, and that this was really what was happening. And so from then on I had the trust of Bobby and his team.
Thank you. Oh no, one more.
One more at the back.
Amazing movie, but I do think, and I wonder, just again to follow up on what was said about whether the battle is, you know, in the Philippines or out of the Philippines, and what people out of the Philippines can do. What's with these countries not sanctioning? How can these leaders survive?
That's a long thing to answer. It's a bit hard to do that because you have to really understand how EITI functions. I think ostensibly we on the board serve as ourselves, not representing the institutions we come to, but it's very clear that the country representatives in fact represent the countries they come from, so they won't move beyond their country position on anything. You can't have a decision made unless a third of each constituency agrees, so it only needs a blockage from one and that's it. And the companies generally don't agree to anything that involves anything that might recognise a precedent where environmental defenders being killed might be a problem for them, or any of these other issues you could imagine that come under the general heading of extractive sector governance. So basically we win fights by using scandals in strategic ways, which is why we've always used exposés of things. But it's like banging your head on a concrete post, if you ask me. I would describe EITI as a progress, and it's gone a long way from an aspirational ask to what it is today, but basically like trench warfare with a baseball bat. They don't move, we hit them on the head as hard as we can, they move. Then we have a period of nothing, and the same thing goes on, and that's just how I think progress happens. It's very, very frustrating.
We came to this event you know, with our sort of broad goals of trying to support land defenders and the natural resources that they protect, and within that there was another part of it was trying to work with increasing transparency and accountability. I'd love to sort of speak to you more about that and see what we can do, and more broadly just a general pitch to anyone here and anyone who may listen later that with our broad goals of supporting land defenders and the natural resources they protect, if we want our film to be a vehicle for how organisations can use it, that's just how we'd love to work with. If people feel energised and feel that we can, our film can help support their work, we would love to be a part of that, and they can go to Delikado film.com, and there's a take action page and contact us, or there's the QR code here.
You can also see that PNNI have a fundraising site.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so one of our most immediate campaigns is to try and support Bobby's team, PNNI. So people can go to pnni.org, and there's a donation page there for smaller funding, and if any organisations think that they could provide some longer term funding and support to PNNI, that would certainly be very welcome as well.
Thank you, everybody.